And we're joined now by Harry Broadman, former Chief of Staff of the President's Council of Economic Advisors. Now, that's an agency that provides economic analysis and policy advice to U.S. presidents. That's interesting. We'll hear from Harry in just a moment. And Suhail Khan, former U.S. policy advisor in the Bush administration. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you very much to both of you for being here. So Harry Broadman, as I said, part of the President's Council of Economic Advisors. If you were called upon to advise this White House today, and the president said, look, we're 2 months into this war, energy prices are way up, consumer prices are ticking up, how bad is the economic hit really? What would you tell him?
I think it's going to be much worse than he thinks, and I think the issue in part is the price of oil, but more importantly, it's the uncertainty of the policy regime around oil and the economy. That is far more corrosive, I think, than the price per se. The price, obviously, as it goes higher, is obviously going to chill the economy, and that becomes a whole other matter. So it's once again, as most economists do, this is balancing act between inflation and recession. And we're right now, it seems to me, on a knife edge.
You say the uncertainty is more dangerous than the price rises, the price increases we've seen so far. Explain that.
So when you don't have certainty of policy or behavior, and I think, to be frank, this president probably is the hallmark of that behavior, it makes a lot of people nervous, investors, employers, consumers, workers. That's very hard to eradicate, I think, particularly with Mr. Trump's track record with respect to uncertainty. He's made uncertain in a lot of different realms than just economic policy, and people are now beginning to see, frankly, his attitude towards policy making and his behavior, and I think that's put a chill down many people's back.
Suhail Khan, if you were, again, so you were an advisor in the Bush administration. If you were in that room advising this president, Donald Trump, and he asked that question, would you second everything we've just heard, or is there a caveat for you?
I would have to agree that this war is one that really, the thinking that is required to go to military action, as one would think, was not really contemplated, I feel, in a very deep manner here, and that the estimates that the Iranian regime would be overthrown very quickly and that we could get out very quickly, I think were overblown. And now we're having to find a way out. And so to answer your question, I would say yes, this president should find an exit as soon as possible to bring that certainty that Mr. Broadman refers to as quickly as possible to the world economy.
And so if the president said, well, I'm in this war, I can't pull out now because we need to achieve our war goals, just hypothetical.
Sure.
And he said, is there something we can do to mitigate the impact to the economy in the interim? Is there an answer to that?
It's going to be really tough because, as you know, the whole challenge here is on the supply chain for oil. And we keep hearing about the straits being closed. And really what we're talking about is not only the physical challenges that might be there in the manner of warships and, the military challenge, but also the insurance that is required for these large tankers to make this very dangerous passage. And that's where, again, the uncertainty issue comes to play, where insurance is all about, making calculated risks. And right now the risks are too high. And because oil is a global commodity, you're finding now that those impacts are having dramatic repercussions around the globe. And as Mr. Broadman indicated, even if the war were to end, God willing, tomorrow, the repercussions would continue for weeks and if not months down the line.
So the president has an answer, right? To an extent, the president has an answer to this for the American public. He says this is only temporary, right? He argues that this is short-term pain for long-term gain. Listen to this.
And in any event, when this conflict is over, the strait will open up naturally. That will resume the flowing and the gas prices will rapidly come back down.
Gasoline's coming down very soon and very big.
So you think gas prices will be lower before the midterm elections?
I think they'll be much lower before midterm, much lower, yes.
Harry Broadman, this has been a key plank of the president's argument, that this is all, the prices of oil and the increase that we've seen so far, it's almost artificial if you listen to the president, because it's all going to come back down as soon as he gets a win in his war. Is that a credible economic argument?
Well, I think it's credible in the sense that it is man-made, pardon the male issue here, but it is artificial in that sense. But it means it's also artificial to bring back and make a more stable regime with respect to oil policy and energy pricing. And I think that the consumers who make their decisions, not just with respect to gasoline at the pump, but as gasoline and oil filters throughout the economy, it makes decision-making by consumers and by industry in terms of construction and making investments much more difficult because, he will say that, oh, I think it's going to be better by X month. But he said that before on a lot of different matters, and he doesn't have a lot of credibility. And I think it's this combination of a lack of credibility and uncertainty that is really spooking the markets. It's spooking consumers and spooking, I think, most of the people who think about the United States as a safe haven. And I think that corrosion is going to be really difficult to get rid of. It's not just a question of turning the oil back on and so forth, and everything's going to be hunky-dory. I don't think that's going to happen. That's I think what my big concern is.
And his Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, who had said earlier in the early weeks of the war, same as the president, this is temporary, oil prices will come back down, is now saying actually prices may not be back down until 2027. So we're now looking at next year. That's the president's own Energy Secretary. Take a look at consumer prices over time. We do want to provide some numbers here. The latest month-over-month CPI, that's the Consumer Price Index for the United States. It shows a big spike in prices since the war with Iran began. This is the whole story here, screen right. For about a year, it's pretty consistent. The price of goods went up by roughly the same proportion every month, 0.2%, 0.3%, in that range. And then when the war starts, in just 1 month, again, it's the last bar, screen right, February to March, the cost of goods shoots up nearly a full percentage point, 0.9%. And most of that is the increase in energy price. Look at the energy prices in particular. Compare energy prices today to what they were a year ago. So no prizes for guessing, it's the orange bar. The increase has been particularly notable. Energy is 12% more expensive today than it was a year ago, just 12 months ago. Now, when that CPI figure first dropped earlier this month, White House Senior Deputy Press Secretary Kush Desai posted on X saying, the president was clear that there would be short-term economic pain due to the war in Iran, but on the whole, most household essentials have been dropping in price or remain stable thanks to Trump's policies. Sohail Khan, so this is an interesting argument. The White House saying, yes, energy prices have gone up, but the rest, eggs that had been talked about so much under the Biden administration, eggs, et cetera, that hasn't gone up yet. In fact, it's even gone down a smidge recently. Your thoughts?
So two things. First, what you're seeing in that data is that energy costs are not isolated. They are built into everything that we use, consume, because eggs need to be driven, or transported to the consumer. And so energy costs are built into everything that we use, consume, et cetera. And so you're going to see that spike. And the fact that you have a spike in energy costs is, of course, going to have a commensurate spike in everything else that we consume, no doubt about it. And I will say, secondly, that there's no doubt that the first year of the Trump presidency has demonstrated that he was able to get costs down for Americans on a number of areas, including in energy costs. Unfortunately, that now has been squandered because of this uncertainty because of the war. And that's why, again, going back to your first question, I would advise, if asked, that he should look for a quick and speedy off-ramp from this conflict so that that uncertainty can be minimized and we get back on track to a much more certain economic outlook.
So we're really at the intersection of economics and politics here, which is something you've both worked on, right? And so how much does the president need to factor in the economy? Given that he's a second-term president, doesn't need to seek re-election, and it's unclear how much this president, prioritizes creating a favorable political environment for Republicans in the midterms. So how much does he need to, I guess, modulate or amend his policy on the Iran war based on what were the economic data that we're seeing?
Yeah, I think you're quite right to raise that question. I think what is uppermost in his mind, perhaps, is his brand and how he will go down in history and what kind of legacy he will leave, not just by going into war, but the way that he's handled the war. And then the way the Iranians, much to the U.S. chagrin, have actually been very clever. More clever, I think, than they believe. And so I think this is a really tough problem for him. He is concerned, obviously, about how his standing in the world among other leaders maybe to some extent what the American public thinks about him, but I think not as much as some people think. And so I think he's now going to have to think about his legacy. But this is quite a thing to deal with, you know, in your second term. And it's a really complex situation. Everybody knows that. The war is very complex. I'm not sure how well it was planned out to begin with. And I think many people who are observing this understand that the strategy did not have an endpoint. How do we know if we've won, right? Every time you make a strategy, you should have a performance benchmark to say, okay, we've achieved this, therefore we can now pull out or do something different. That seems to be missing.
Sohail Khan, this is an interesting one for you because you worked in the Bush administration, and so much of Bush's legacy is tied to the Iraq War, which is seen as a debacle. And what insights can you give us on how presidents think about this, war and legacy?
Sure. Well, we saw this movie before, as it were, in President Bush's second term in 2006 in the midterms, because of the Iraq War and the perception that many Americans had that it was not going well, and because of the challenges, including into planning, we saw that the Republicans lost both the House and Senate in 2006. And so now, again, presidents, generally speaking, in midterms usually have pushback, and the country kind of swings back and forth. So that's expected. But you might see a much more dramatic shift, and we're already seeing that in some special elections around the country because of the very soft economy. Again, that was started out pretty strong in the president's second term, but even though he's not going to be up for re-election, you're exactly right. In order for him to continue in pushing his agenda, he needs a Congress that'll be amenable to passing his agenda, and he will.
Does he? Because passing laws is not overall really his thing.
Well, we see this president is definitely leaning hard on executive orders, no doubt about it. But still, you need a Congress, at least, if not to pass your agenda, not to oppose your agenda through hearings, you know, and trying to bring your cabinet secretaries to the Hill every other week and to excoriate them on one issue or over the other. So his agenda would definitely see major hurdles if there was a deep shift in the Congress. In the House, he could survive if it's just the House, but if he were to lose major allies in the Senate, then that could really bring his power to much more of a curtailed one in the last 2 years of his four-year presidency.
Harry Broadman, I'm sorry to do this to you because we have only 30 seconds left, but how much of a runway do you think this president has with this war, given that the midterms are 6 months away?
Well, realistically, probably 6 months, but that's probably given him too much rope. It could be 3 months. The sooner he can figure out what he wants to do and do it, the better off he's going to be, both in terms of the elections, but his legacy.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much to both of you. That's Harry Broadman, former Chief of Staff of the President's Council of Economic Advisors. Thanks for being with us. And Sohail Khan, former U.S. Policy Advisor in the Bush administration. Thank you.